So here is what you're going to need today. A positive mental attitude. All right, I'll write that down so you can see. Yay, a positive mental attitude. All right. And if you were able to pick up things from school or you have these things at home, here's what I'm going to be working with. You'll need some watercolor paper. All right, there's some watercolor paper. And you will need some water. I have some water. I know it's in the shadow, but trust me, there's water in that little jar. And some paint brushes. I brought a whole bunch of paint brushes, although I'm just going to use 2 of them today. But since we're setting up, I figured I'll just, set up to do paint. And your watercolor set. I do not have one of the school watercolor sets. I didn't take one home because I have my own watercolor set that I like very much. Now, if you are using your own watercolors, you might have the tubes. Tubes are okay too. I personally prefer the cakes. Over years of working, I've come to find that I really like the way the cakes work. But if you're a tube sort of person, then tubes are fine. All right. Now, the thing you'll need with the tube, and you probably know this, is a palette. Now, this watercolor tablet or this watercolor set has a palette, but sometimes you can have ones that are made out of ceramic or plastic that are separate. Okay. So once again, paper, water, brush, watercolor paint. Now, if you don't have any of these things, if you're just like, you couldn't make it into school, and I know that was challenging, they gave you almost no notice, and you don't have the stuff at home, it's okay. Please do just stay on the line with us, all right? I have an activity that you can do that'll allow you to keep up with the unit, although you'll miss the watercolor stuff about it. But don't worry about it. You can at least, if you just have even just a pencil and paper, that would be great. If you have a tablet, that works too. If you have the option between a tablet or a pencil and paper, today it's preferred that you use the pencil and paper. All right, I know the tablet can imitate watercolor nicely. Just for today, humor me and work with pencil and paper. And then if you really do get stuck, here, I'll wave something in front of the camera so you know I'm still here. If you really do get stuck, then you can use the tablet later. One more thing. If it looks like we're not going to come on to school and you don't have watercolor paper or watercolor paint, I highly advise getting on to the old Taobao or JD and, harassing your parents until they buy you a set. They're really not that expensive. Though like the Prang set, the 12 color set is probably in the neighborhood of 20 renminbi. All right. These paintbrushes, same thing, 5 renminbi, 20 renminbi. That's not a lot of money. And it'll make, if we have to do this entire unit online from home, it'll make this unit more fun. Okay. Okay, so that's the bare minimum of what you need. I brought a couple extra things that I won't be using. I won't be using the sponge today, but there's also a sponge. If you've got a sponge, go raid the kitchen, see if you can get a sponge. And I also have some tape. All right, and if you have tape, go ahead and secure it. If you don't have tape, don't worry about it. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you a demonstration of some basic watercolor techniques, and then I'm going to give you some time to try them out. And then I'm going to give you kind of assignment, for lack of a better word, or a challenge for the day, and then give you some time, and then that'll be class. I do not suspect that class will take the whole 80 minutes that we have. All right, I think we'll probably be done early, which is fine. And then next class will come in and, oh, see, pace makes waste there. And we'll come next class and do some more stuff. All right, so I've got the same size sheet of paper that I prepared for you for online learning, and I'm going to cut it in half. You don't have scissors or a razor blade, and you know, sadly, I have both of these things, but I don't have them with me, and I'm not going to run and go get them. There we go. So I'm just going to make a couple folds in here and give it a good tear. All right. Now you'll notice the watercolor paper I gave you has two sides to it. It has a side with tooth, you probably can't see, and it has a smooth side. All right, you remember tooth means it has like a texture or bumps to it, right? All right, you want to use the toothed side of your watercolor paper. So have a look. Does it have two different sides? If it does, choose the side that has texture. Now, in most cases, what we do is we tape the paper down, and that's because watercolor paper is made of fibers, and when those fibers get wet, they get bigger, and what happens is the paper starts to warp, and that's natural. That happens to everybody in the whole universe and everything. So the way, and even if you tape it down, that's not going to prevent it. Well, you tape it down because when it dries, then it pulls flat again. The fibers get small, and instead of drying in a wave, they dry in, the paper pulls tight and it dries nice and flat. So if you can, if it's an option, tape your paper down. If it's not an option, we'll be okay. You will survive without it. Oh, I was wondering where that showed. Okay, so now I've got the paper prepared. Here's how to use your watercolor palette. There's my watercolor palette. Oh, a little stuck there. There we go. Okay, and here's my water. All right. I wonder if I bump up the exposure, does that make it any better? You see a little bit better there. All right. So when you're using watercolor cakes, what you've got to do is get the paint soft first. And here's how you do it. It's super easy. You take your brush, put it in the water. While the brush is wet, you find the cake that you want to use. I'm going to use a nice vermilion here. And you put some water on it. And then you chill out while it gets soft. I think I'm going to use this kind of like Prussian blue as well. What else goes? Those are really terrible colors together. Let's see, where's a green? I think a green would look nice. Yeah, I'm going to use this. I think I'm going to use this dark green. I think that'd be cool. All right, and then you just kind of like chill out. You know, it doesn't take long. It only takes like a minute or so. So the first technique I'm going to show you is called a wash. And I'm going to write this down so you can see. Let's see here. A wash. Let's see, is that going to work? Oh yeah, W A S H. A wash. Ooh. All right. And a wash is a very thin layer of paint. Very, very thin layer of paint. And here's how we make a wash. I'm going to bring our color palette back. There it is. See? I'll just put it, I don't want to put it over the top. Here's what we do. Here we go. And here's my water again. That's going to be sort of half off screen here because I want you to see everything. First, take some water, put it on your palette. Okay, there it is. I put some water on my palette. And then the sunlight comes in and blinds everything out. And then just pick up some paint with your brush and put it in the water. That's it. And hopefully it's showing up on your screen. You can see that the paint's really thin. All right. It's not a very, actually the color is strong, but it's translucent. So it always tends to have a feel of like looking light, but it's actually pretty strong color. Now, some things are going to have to go off camera here. All right, so a wash. What I'm doing over here is I'm just like loading up my brush. All right, it's going to be off screen, but I'm just going to stick it in there and pick up some paint like that. All right, and what you do is wash as you make these big fields of color. There we go. Now I'm doing it with my whole paper. All right. Some watercolor purists will tell you that you want to get it even and you don't want to show any brush strokes. And I guess there is a technical quality to that. Although we're not going to be watercolor purists today. I want to show you a couple of different things. And sometimes I think if you can use variations in texture to your advantage, then you should do it. We don't have to stick to the pure has to be like this. Now, a fun thing about a wash too is that you can mix colors right on the paper. So you can't see it, but off screen, I'm putting some more water on my palette, and then I'm going to pick up the green here. And again, you can't see it, but it's there. Trust me. And you see how I've got this bottom area screen, bottom area paper. I'm going to add some, and I'm going to put it up against the blue there so that it kind of mixes. That's a wash. All right. Probably difficult to see on your screen because the sunlight's bright and I don't know if that helps at all. Probably doesn't help at all either. The sunlight's bright and the paint is thin. But trust me, I've got some like light blue, some very translucent blue there, and some translucent green down there. That, my friends, is called a wash. All right, let that sink in. All right, there's my paper. And now the next, and this is important to see. Okay, sorry, that's all. Well, all right, we'll just do it here. All right, so I am not going to tape this one down just to prove to you that it's okay and you can live without the paper being taped down. The next technique we're going to do is called a dry brush. All right, D-R-Y, oops, sorry, that's a brush. B-R-U-S-H, dry brush. It doesn't mean the brush is dry, but it means it's dry, like the most dry we'll have it for using watercolors. Dry brush is for very intense color, and I have found great for making lines and being expressive. So here's what we're doing. All right. My watercolor paint is nice and soft now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dip the brush right into the watercolor cake. If you're dipping it into a tube, you dip it right into the paint rather than mixing it with water. And the dry brush technique has all different things. I think the most basic way is to make lines. All right, so I'm going to make a line. Let's see here. What shall I paint? What have I been painting recently? I don't want to do I know what all right, I know what I'll do. I'll do a kind of tree branch here. So here, a tree branch coming up. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space here. Let's see here. All right, so there we go. I made the kind of beginning of a tree branch. You notice I left some gaps in here. I'll show you why in a moment. But before I do that, I'm also going to show you that you can also not just make lines, but you can use the side of your brush with the dry brush and get cool, expressive marks in there. All right. All right, now, I don't know if you know this, but it is that time of year where it's winter. If any of you have been outside today, I think you probably can tell that it's winter. All right, there, I just showed you some different marks. And it's that time of the year where we start making, in art, at least in art class, we start making plum blossoms. All right, so there we go. I'm just going to put some very simple dry brush technique, make my plum blossoms here. Let's see here. Oh yeah, we want one here where I left gaps. That's why I left the gaps, because one of the tricky things with watercolor paint is that you can't really paint over things. All right, and in acrylic painting, it's a little different. If we get back into school, I'll show you the difference in acrylic painting. But with watercolor painting, we kind of we can sort of ad lib, you know, we can kind of do it as we go along, but we have to have at least some kind of plan as to what's going to happen. All right, there we go. And there is my beginning of a plum blossom or a plum tree. Let that sink in. Wash is back. Let's see if I can keep that out of the sunlight. There we go. Okay, and the last technique I'm going to show you for now. Now there's more techniques coming up, but we're just going to do 3. I've been told 3 is the magic number. I don't know if that's true or not, but we're going to do this. The technique is called wet on. Maybe I need to get a little more paint. Wet on wet. All right, and that's because the paper's wet and the brush is wet. It's like a combination of a wash and a dry brush at the same time. All right. What's going to happen is if the paper is wet, the dry brush isn't going to be as intense or as immediate as we have it with just the dry brush, because the water on the paper is going to make the paint flow a little bit. And you use that to your advantage. It's because you do it because you want to do it, because you want that effect. So, see, it's not as intense. And it kind of gets a more expressive, sort of wispy look to it. Okay, there's my bamboo. All right, and these are just different wet on wet. This is a wet on wet technique. That's the name of the technique. I'm sorry. All right, there we go. There's my very basic bamboo using the wet on wet technique. I want to show you just one more simple technique, which is a little bit like a combination of the wet on wet and the dry brush, but it's just a little bit different approach to doing something. And then you're going to be challenged with choosing a symbol from our Padlet or from your own internet research, something East Asian, and then using some of these techniques to recreate it or create it in your own kind of way. All right, so here we go. I'm going to switch back to Madam Document Camera. So just give me a moment to press a button or two. Hey, and there we are. All right, you can see the bottom of the document camera. All right, there we go. Hopefully, let's see. How does that look? Hopefully you can see that okay. So, like I said, this technique is a way to be precise with your painting. All right. And what I'm going to do is use a bit of physics. Or physics, definitely physics, all right? My water is a little bit green here already. Now, normally I would change the water, but that means I have to get up, walk into the kitchen. I'm not going to do that, all right? So I've got my brush loaded up with water, and I'm just going to, with clean water, paint an area, all right? I'm just going to fill in some spots. And what's going to happen in a minute here is that I'm going to put some paint. I'm going to dry brush some paint into that water area, and the paint is going to go just where the water is, all right? So maybe you remember this unit is about interdisciplinary learning. So hey, look, we're talking about physics. Make sure you tell your science teacher that we were talking about it. Maybe your science teacher will give you a little extra credit. Say, oh, I learned about cohesion in art class. All right, so what I'm going to do, just like the dry brush technique, I've got my brush here. I like this little one. I've got quite the arsenal of brushes, being an art teacher for 20 years now. But you can use any brush. I'm just, because I've got lots of brushes, I use them. All right, and like the dry brush, there we go. I'm just going to pick up some paint on my brush here. And then I'm going to touch it into the areas where I put the water. And the paint's not going to go anywhere except where there's water. This works with ink too. All right, it doesn't blend around, it doesn't bleed, it just stays right where the water is. And I find this is a nice way of being precise, but also it dries in this sort of marbled form. All right, and there we go. That's the technique. I can show you, I did this one with the other class and see. You can see how it kind of, my octopus there dries in that sort of marbled foam, just the way this one's going to dry too. So that's another technique. That's a combination of dry brush and wet on wet and wash. Pretty fun, hey? All right, so let's go to the chat. I'm going to stop the recording first. Part of it today. So I can practice basic and intermediate techniques with watercolor. I can make connections between techniques and the words used to describe it. I can practice skills and learn about which I like best. That's the one I kind of want to focus on today, really, right? Is it a little bit like media testing? All right. When have I used watercolor before? And try and think before just last class too. How is this experience similar and different? How is this experience like media testing from the drawing unit? Hey, we're building upon stuff. And how can I replicate what the teacher does? All right, so we've done most of this already. And this is what we're going to do today. I'm going to fix a typo. There we go. There we go. Great. And I have to go back to preview if I want it to work. Yay, all right. So we've done these two things. I showed you last class, I showed you wash and dry brush and wet on wet. And we chose a symbol from the media testing and we painted it on our own. And today I'm going to show you a couple of resist techniques, two resist techniques and a glazing technique, right? These are different ways of going about watercolor. Yes, Ella. Check this out. This here comes from this book that we have in the classroom that I currently can't seem to locate, and is also not loading on our DX. But trust me, if you give it a little bit of patience, this is the new artist handbook, and it has got loads and loads and loads of different techniques and approaches to using watercolor and things all about watercolor. I know it's not loading right now. That's just the peculiarity of online learning. But if you do give it a little bit of time and you want to go deeper with the techniques, or you want to read what some other artists have said about the techniques we're going to use today. It's a great resource. All right, we took lots of time scanning this book so that you could have it, and it's still not loading. Super. And then, okay, there we are. So I'm going to make the shift to the document camera. Oh, hang on. Oh, let's see here. Aha, there we go. And switch to hooray, there's my hand using the document camera. All right, super. Okay, so we're gonna do a couple of techniques, watercolor techniques today, just in addition to some of the things we've been doing before. So let's review. Here is my folder full of the stuff that we've been working on. All right, that's my note for positive mental attitude. And remember I showed you the wet on wet and the dry brush and the adding water. And this is another dry brush, right? We'll review dry brush stuff, hooray. And there's some wet on wet from the other class, yeah. And then today, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you glazing. I'll write this down, let's see, I got a pencil here somewhere. I'm going to show you glazing, which is layering paint to get different colors. And I'm going to show you resist techniques. All right, and resist is pulling water away from something to get specific techniques. All right. So what you're going to need is the standard materials. All right, I borrowed this set from school and I'm curious how it works. So this is the watercolor cake set that I'm going to use today. Different from the one that I got from Japan. This is one we have at school that the diploma students have. I haven't tried it out yet, so I'm going to try it out with you all today. And as before, water and paintbrush. What does that say? All right. And I also sponge. All right. I'm going to use a sponge today. Actually, I'm going to get some salt later. I meant to pick some up just so you can see. And I just use kitchen salt and you can just use kitchen salt. So I don't know how much of this painting you can see. It's hard for me to see. It's just far enough away so that I can't see what's on the screen with my glasses. Let's see here. No. There we go. All right. So what glazing is? I'm sorry, that's awkward wording. Let me talk about glazing. All right. Glazing is a technique where we layer colors on top of one another to get additional colors. All right. Now, you can do really simple things like if you have, I hope you can see, I have some blue in the background. All right. And if I want to have a lighter blue, I can put white over the top of it, and that'll make some areas of the blue light. Although there are other techniques out there, and it'd be hard to show you today, but I'll show you a little bit, where I have some blue here, and if I put the right kind of red over the top of it, it'll actually turn purple. And that's what I'm going to go for. I don't know what you can see here because it's all really light, but I have this octopus, there's the octopus eyeballs, and there's a tentacle, and here's a tentacle, right? And there's a little, octopus has got this octopus has some spots, and also it's flying a kite. I'm into these funny things with sea creatures flying kites, which comes from a question of the day. All right, so here's what I'm going to do for you today. What I'm going to do, I hope, is make some of this blue that I have in the background lighter and darker, all right, using the glazing technique. All right, so if you remember, if you're going to use your watercolor, cake watercolors, what you got to do is get the colors wet first. All right, so in fact, I just had a brilliant idea. I'm going to try and make some of this blue gray as well. And I'm going to go into mixing colors another day. I just want you to see the technique. And I'm also going to make some of this blue. I want to make it more blue. And I want to make it also a bit white. All right, so I put, just like before, I put my paint, or I put some water on the paints first so that they can get soft before I start using them. All right, now we remember, I'm going to use the palette from my other watercolor set. Remember this guy? Maybe, maybe not. That's going to be just off the camera there. I'll put it on camera for the time being. It's just so you can see. All right, and so what I'm going to do is just like before, I'm going to make a wash. Okay, and the wash is a thin layer of paint. So I'm going to put some water on my palette. See that? All right, now I'm going to attempt to make some gray here, because if you can see, I've got a wave going on in the background here, and I want that to be important. So I'm going to put some gray around this wave. All right, and so we don't know this yet, but I'll tell you, this is how it is. An orange and a blue tend to cancel each other out. Complementary colors tend to cancel each other out. And so I'm going to pick up a bit of that, like kind of red orange I got, like this brown. This is like a umber, but we won't go into that just yet. And I'm going to make a wash. Yeah. Okay. And so now I got to move this off camera so I can see the painting. And I'm going to just load up my brush with the wash, and I'm going to go around the outside of the wave. And what that should do is make the color less intense. So what I want, there's that kind of little wave deals. What are those called? Anybody know? Anybody take environmental systems and have to study the names of things? The froth of the wave, perhaps? I don't know. There we go. And so I added some of that there around some of this orangish brown color, because it's going to make the blue actually a little duller. Now, because I don't want a hard line on there, I'm actually just going to add some water over the top of this too, so it's a nice soft transition. It's a way that you can go about it. All right. Yay. There we go. So that's one way to kind of make it grayer. Now, I want to make some of my blues a little bit darker, a little bit more intense, give them some more power. So I have a light blue. I just have a very thin layer of blue on there right now. I'm going to add more blue to that blue to give it kind of a more intense feel. Watercolors are intended to be translucent, all right? That is, you don't want too much of the watercolor to be opaque, or at least that's the nature of the paint. How about that? If you want something that's very strong and opaque, it's better to use a different kind of paint. And there's in English, it's called gouache, or sometimes tempera. In Chinese, I think we call it shui fen. I have no idea what it is in Korean, sorry. All right, so there you go. There's my blue wash. And I'm going to add it to parts of my wave here to make that blue more intense. So there we go. All right, so hopefully that came out in the screen okay. I've added some blue here on top of the blue to make it more intense, and so now I'm getting some contrast. All right. I should have got, oh, I do have multiple areas of water. All right, and I can do the same thing with the white. I actually have 2 bowls full of water here because I knew I would need 2 bowls. Oops, 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 oops. And I'm going to do, actually this time, I'm going to do a dry brush over the top of the wash. This actually, I tell you what, honestly, I'm going to do something somewhat risky because I'm going to try and paint wet paint next to wet paint, which sometimes doesn't end well. But I'm just going to dry brush some white from the froth of the waves in there so you can see. And hopefully it doesn't bleed into one another. Probably very, very hard for you to see at home. You know, and so, well, you can't really see it right now. But trust me, I'm putting some dry brush over the top of some of this blue. You know, that's going to bleed. That's not a good idea. Tell you what, I'm not going to go any further with that as to not make a larger mess. Okay, so once again, this is a glazing technique, all right? Glazing means layering one color on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. Maybe next class, when you come back, I want this octopus to be purple. But what I'm going to do is paint it blue first, and then paint red over the top of it, so it gets to be that kind of purple color, all right? But I'm not going to do that today. I did these circles last night, which is why I couldn't do it today. But I'll show you in future episodes. All right. Okay, let that sink in while I go get something out of the kitchen. All righty. I just went to the kitchen really quick. I'm working in the dining room, so kitchen's easy. I know that looks like a bowser, but it's actually salt. It's like salt shaker. Isn't that clever? All right, so now we're going to do resist. All right, and resist is putting something down and then putting something down on the paper so that the paint doesn't go there, and right. And actually, the first sort of resist one, and the way I'm actually good at it, is using a sponge. All right, now these are actually natural sponges. Honestly, they work considerably better than your kitchen sponge. All right, but they're expensive. I have a bunch in the classroom. I was hoping we could, if we were in the classroom, we could use them, but oh well, such is life. But you can still make the kitchen sponge work. All right, so take the sponge, and I'm putting it in water. It works better if it's a little bit wet first. Now, the effects of the sponge are slight. You'll have to do it multiple times. So I'm going to do the best that I can to show you how it works here. But have a little bit of faith that it does work. It's not going to show up on camera particularly well, and it also works best when you do this multiple times, not just one time. All right, so got my paintbrush. I have my water. I have my palette. I'm going to make some more wash, some more blue wash. Hey, yeah. This is like a cobalt blue, and I really want like an ultramarine blue. But all right, so there we go. I made myself some wash, and I'm going to paint in some more of this sea, this water here. All right, and there we go. And put a nice wash on there. I've seen in that handbook, that artist handbook, it says you can make washes with the sponge. I've never had success doing that, but you're welcome to try. All right, so hopefully you can see that I put a wash down there, and I've got my sponge. I'm wringing the water out of it. All right, there we go. Now my sponge is wet, and I pulled the water out of it, and I'm going to start to soak up some of that water in strategic places I think are good. I'm not going to soak up the whole thing. It would kind of make it pointless. All right, because then you just may as well not paint it. But you can get, I think that like I said, you do this multiple times, and the fun effect of this is it gives it this feathered effect. All right, so I don't know how much you can see what's happening there, but I can see it where I'm here. Right here where I dip the sponge in, it's lighter. There's less paint on the paper. And as I do that again and again, and I might even glaze some white into there, you'll start to see that effect different. Let's see, give me just a moment here. I'm going to try, I need a different color blue. I'm going to show you a way that this works. Hopefully this is the blue. Yeah, that's the one I wanted. All right, so I have a different color blue. I'm going to make a wash here. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, give me just a moment, everybody. Okay, so I've got a different colored blue. This is called an ultramarine. I will talk about the colors another class. So here we are. Now I'm going to show you this resist technique again. Can we see down at the bottom of the octopus? Hopefully. See, I'm going to work on this tentacle here. Now octopus, I've noticed they tend to have the underside of their tentacles are whiter than the top side of them. So I'm going to paint in carefully some blue here. And then with my sponge again, I'm going to soak some of it up. And like I said, that sponge gives it a nice feathered effect. And then that way, hopefully you can see that. I don't know how well that works, but you can see in right here, I've got a darker blue up here and a lighter blue here. And then I'm going to do another glaze of red over the top of it, and that's going to turn purple. It's really, really cool. Maybe by the end of the class, I can show you. One more technique that you can do, and I've had limited success with this, but it does work, and I've seen other artists do it, is using salt. Table salt. That's what I've got there. All right. That's a salt shaker. I have big bags of this. We got loads of it in the classroom. We get lucky and we're back before the winter holiday. We can play around with it. And let's see, I'm going to back up over here. Hopefully you can see the corner of my painting. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sprinkle a generous layer of salt on there. And that salt will resist the paint as well. Now, the tricky bit is we can't just put it on there and dust it off. We got to like chill out and let the water dry before we brush it off. All right, but I wanted to see how it works. I put some down. Okay, I'm gonna switch screens here.